Thanks for listening to Games by Design, our online journal where we record and share the stuff that we learn about game design as we try to make our own games and play other people's games. And today we are just two. We are Zach, that's me, and we are Noah. Hi, Noah.
Hello.
And the others couldn't make it today, but we're going to be talking about vibes, generally speaking, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about how games can manage to successfully blend comedy with seriousness or goofiness with seriousness. And this kind of came up because I've recently revisited Majesty, which is the game that we're looking at right now on the screen, which is a really clever, fun fantasy kingdom simulator game from like 2000 that I used to play when I was a kid. And I was young enough at that time when I first played it that it kind of freaked me out sometimes. There's like spooky pictures and like blood and bones and creatures and sounds and stuff like that. So I would probably say it's kind of like a dark fantasy game. At least it felt like that to a kid. And yet, the game is brimming with these like over-the-top, goofy voice acting moments and quotes, which constantly play as things are happening in the game. Like it's constant. There's always someone talking and they're always saying something like ridiculous. Even the monsters can be kind of funny. Like the vampires are going, blah.
Blah, yep.
Like, yeah.
To this day.
The wizards are all goofy and the gnomes are ridiculous. Yeah, it's just
the
funny.
gnomes. It's the gnomes. I to this day I will still say, but I'm just a gnome.
Yeah. But it's also, yeah, I like so iconic. The comedy in this game is so iconic, but it's also like kind of a dark, kind of a serious game. Sometimes, at least some of the rest of the time. So it's got me thinking about blending like tones, I guess you might say, in games and other stories, like especially and specifically when it comes to like goofiness mixed with like stuff that you wouldn't think of as funny. So there's like, black comedies, there's funny horror movies or funny moments in horror movies. And I'd like to understand how games can successfully mix and match goofy stuff with serious or scary stuff without like undermining the serious stuff. I actually wanted to ask you, Noah, about Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
Because you recently finished that, and I actually haven't played it, so I'm not really like super familiar with what it is like in tone.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's anything about it that kind of deviates from what you might expect from like a horror game. Like, is there anything goofy, or is it just like straight pervasive oppressive horror, like beginning to end? Tell me what your experience with the game's vibes was.
Yeah, absolutely. And to preface, I played the Silent Hill 2 remake, so I've not played the original. I'm trying to get my hands on it, but it's everywhere for like $200. And
okay.
I just that's absurd. I'm not gonna spend that money yet. Follow us on Patreon.
We'll buy Noah a new video game.
Yeah. But yeah, so I played through Silent Hill 2 remake recently, and that game is not funny. I don't think off the top of my head I could think of a single situation where I was chuckling or laughing or probably even really smiling, because that's just not that game. You said pervasive. It is absolutely pervasive. Like the whole time I felt just this constant pressure and presence of dread and terror. And it's funny because I while I was playing through it, as I'd never played Silent Hill before, I didn't really know anything about it. I was going in kind of blind, and so my first thought was, I wonder if this is going to be anything like the Resident Evil games. I played a little bit of Resident Evil 2, and I've watched quite a few playthroughs, and I know quite a bit about the Resident Evil games. And those games are goofy. Those games, sometimes you feel like you're watching like an 80s action movie. They have the quips, they have the one-liners. It's pretty campy at times, but it is scary in its own way. I don't think I would call those games horror games as much. But Silent Hill was not like that. There was hardly any quips. There was no I don't think I can think of a single funny moment, except for the game has alternative endings. It has these 2 fake out endings that you can get if you've played the game once and then you play through it again. And they're absurd. They're super silly, and I actually kind of don't like them for that reason. That's just I don't know. We'll get into that in a second. But playing through Silent Hill, it was scary the whole time. There was no fun times to be had there. It was great, but it sucked at the same time.
It looks like a mean, nasty, keep you down kind of game.
It is
in terms of tone. And you said it's got some goofy alternative endings that you don't like because they're goofy.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Well, before we get to that, let's talk about the Resi games, the Resident Evil ones that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
You said they're goofier, they're campier.
Oh yeah.
You said they don't really feel like horror games as much. Do you think it's because they're more campy, it's not as scary? Is that, do you think, why?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the game too. Like Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a scary game. I think that one is legitimately scary. It has some campy moments, but that one is frightening. But Resident Evil 4 is notorious for being over the top and kind of departing from the horror and more of an action adventure game. But I think one of the defining traits of it is that Leon Kennedy's is like this total goofus. He's so silly. He's so silly, and he says all these silly things all the time. And I think it works well for that game. But I think if you were to put that style of humor into Silent Hill, I don't think it would fit for a lot of reasons. But I think that there's this blending comedy with serious premises, plots, or themes is such a tricky thing to do, because I think when done poorly, it can undercut the tension, or it can feel dissonant, and remove the tension, undermine the mood that is being established by the game already. And so I think Resident Evil does that fine, because it sets it from the get-go. It says, all right, we're going crazy, goofy town. But if that were to happen in Silent Hill, if like hour 3 into Silent Hill, I kill all of these freaky monsters, and then he looks around and he says, "Where's everybody going? Bingo!" Like that wouldn't work. That wouldn't fit. That wouldn't feel good at all. So
well, actually, I was just thinking while you were talking, something you said made me think of you and I have both seen a couple of Martin McDonagh's movies recently.
I'm so glad you brought these up.
Yeah,
I had that written down in my notes.
This dude's like a master of black comedy in my opinion. Like In Bruges is one of my, like, I saw it and it was one of those rare movies where I watched it like twice in the first week that I saw it. I just thought it was so funny, and it's also like really dark. Banshees of Inisherin is
same way,
similarly hilarious and dark. I'm fascinated that you already had it in your notes. Like, tell me what you're thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely. I let me see. Let me find exactly what I wrote. So I wrote down some of my thoughts that I had on comedies in general, and why I don't really watch comedy movies, and why I don't tend to enjoy comedy movies. But I do enjoy comedy, and I enjoy laughing. It's not like I don't like laughing. It's just that I don't tend to like comedy movies. And so I was thinking, all right, what are some of my favorite what are some of the funniest movies I've seen that I genuinely love? And the first 3 that sprang to mind were Banshees of Inisherin, In Bruges, and then The Grand Budapest Hotel. I think that one of the thing that I wrote down that really was sticking out to me when I was thinking about this was it's not just that these movies are funny. All of these movies make me laugh, but oftentimes in the same scene or even sentence, they will legitimately move me or disturb me or make me cry. There's these nuanced. These are nuanced. It's nuanced comedy, and I think that Martin McDonagh does it well in such a way that the comedy does not undercut the tension. It does not undercut the overall tone and themes of the movies that he makes.
And it doesn't undercut it. And that's interesting. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, like, because I sense what you're saying is true to me too. Like, there's some things where it just like, don't put funny in it. It doesn't fit, know. But then sometimes you can have like really serious stuff, but also it's got like hilarious whatnot going on. Like a Martin McDonagh movie. Another director I'm a really big fan of is Martin Scorsese, of course. And like so many of his movies to me, not all of them, they're all quite different from each other. Not all of them are different, but many of them are different. But some of them feel like black comedies to me. I think of like Wolf of Wall Street is an example that it's super funny, but it's like super disturbing, And the same goes for some of his other ones, like his gangster ones and stuff. Like they're full of really funny, really charming characters, but they're also like super dark and super distressing. And like there's perhaps one of the most iconic scenes in cinema, honestly, is when it's that one Goodfellas scene where Joe Pesci's character is harassing Ray Liotta's character, and he's asking him why he's funny. And it goes, that scene's like funny and irreverent and goofy or whatever, and then it just like instant tone change, like drop of a hat, turns into one of the most icy, terrifying things you've ever seen, and then it flips right back like a few minutes later. It's kind of I'm fascinated by how they do this. I'm really fascinated by that.
Yeah, I had a thought. I think that, and this is, I think again, like a comedy is subjective, and ultimately, like what you find funny and what you find compelling are subjective things. But to me, at least, I find that comedy, or goofiness, silliness, whatever you want to call it, is effective when it is established within the context of the world more fully. I think oftentimes about the Marvel movies, modern Marvel movies, and a common complaint about the modern ones is that the comedy takes people out of it. You know, that they quip so much that there's no stakes anymore. You know, because something big happens, there's a quiet pause, and then so and so turns to the camera and says, "Well, that just happened," or "Oh, he's right behind me, isn't he?" And like, you know, these things like this that they don't feel like these characters would say these things in the world. And perhaps in a different movie where that was established from the get-go, or that was the tone that was established from the get-go, then it would be fine. But one of my favorite movies, Grand Budapest Hotel, the comedy, it always happens between characters. It's never between the character and you as the viewer. It's never like an inside joke between you and the viewer. It's often like on screen between characters, or on screen with interacting with the world, and that I find more engaging. I think also, to me, good comedy makes me laugh, but it is used as a way to humanize and pull me in a bit more. There was a particular moment I was thinking of was from the first Last of Us game. Surprising no one that I'm talking about for Last of Us, but the first Last of Us game, these aren't really spoilers, light spoilers. There's like the recurring bit that Ellie is big on these horrendous dad jokes, and she's always like, trying to get Joel with him, right? And she like tells him the jokes, and then he never like responds, he never reciprocates. And it's funny, you know, like it's funny and it's charming, but like that's the thing, is it's not just funny. Like these are silly moments and I giggle, but every time it happens, I'm further endeared to these characters, and I'm further endeared to Ellie. So it's like, it's not just that it's funny, it's not without substance or meaning. It's humorous, but it's also a wonderful opportunity for characterization. And so I think to me that makes comedy more compelling, is when it's well-rounded, you know, it has multiple purposes.
That makes a lot of sense. And like a lot of the examples that you and I have talked about so far with like the Martin McDonagh movies and with Scorsese and Grand Budapest too, like that does seem to be kind of the common thing. The Joe Pesci scene I was talking about, that's like showing his character, which is a terrifying character, you know, like it's really, really good. But, and like, yeah, in Last of Us, like she's making these dorky jokes. It kind of just like shows that she's like a kid, you know, like a dorky little kid, you know, and like, and that's like important to understand if you're going to understand the story, that like, you know, the relationship is between him as kind of a surrogate father figure and her as like a surrogate daughter kind of a thing, you know, and so, or kind of a found family kind of a dealio, and it works a lot better in that game when you understand that she's a kid and she makes all these jokes that indicate that she's a kid, you know, and she's, that's a really interesting point. I like that a lot.
I had a heck of a time trying to think of funny games that I enjoy. Like I was sitting there, I was scrolling through my Steam library, and I'm like, I don't play funny games. I don't play games that are comedies. This is not something I do. Like it's not a genre that I dive into. In fact, I don't think it's a genre that like even the game industry really like. There's not a lot of. I mean, can you think of a single like AAA funny game that has come out in the last 15 years? I feel like that was more common in like the early 2000s and stuff. But like now, I don't know. I don't know.
It's definitely true that I feel like it's, and this could be just totally, this is just my hot take. It seems to me that it's more common in the indie space, you know, like with stuff like Untitled Goose Game or whatever. But then you have games like, I mean, you had like the Grand Theft Auto games. Those seem like black comedy games to me. They're very dark, but they're very goofy, like very goofy. The old Saints Row games were like that too. There was another one, Hitman. So Hitman is Hitman's hilarious.
It's super funny.
It's about murdering people, but but it's so goofy. It's so goofy. And I guess I'm wondering, kind of this is the thing I'm wrestling with here, because we're thinking about making a new game here, and I've got some ideas, and we've got some stuff that we're trying to figure out for this new game. And we're trying to get, I want to get, we've talked about the tone kind of up front, like what we kind of want to have here, something a little serious, a little bit like more, with more gravitas, you know? And I'm wondering if there's room in it for silliness or comedy, either not necessarily, like through, I think specifically through like the mechanics and stuff like that, you know, like what if the mechanics are a little bit like on the playful side? Does that cheapen the seriousness of a story or the world or whatever? One of the things I was hoping to ask Nick about, and you know, it's too bad he's not here, but he's been playing Elden Ring. You've played a fair amount of Elden Ring too.
Oh yeah.
I was watching him play it for the, you know, like this was the first time he'd ever sat down to play it. I was watching him play it, and he was commenting, he was just, you know, effusive about it, because of course he is. He's, you know, he loves this stuff. But he was talking about how serious and like how like self-serious, how seriously the game world takes itself and everything.
Right. Yeah.
But also like fairly early on, you see those like rolling goat things, which just completely took me off guard.
It's so funny. It's so funny.
It's hilarious. And I wonder, like, does that cheapen the seriousness of this thing? Because it didn't seem like it. I still feel terrified of this world. I'm not sure how to quite thread that needle, you know? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing to grapple with. I think that I even like struggle, like I'll do like writing and stuff, or I'll think about the game, and I'm like, I don't like where do we draw the line on certain things, and where is it okay? And I almost wonder if sometimes it's a matter of just like case by case, and you just gotta like sit down and say, okay, this is funny, but does it dampen the experience, or does it undercut the mood? And if it does, then you don't include it. And if it doesn't, and you feel like it's funny and it doesn't undermine anything, then put it in. Because I love, there's a lot of games that I am personally extraordinarily invested in, but that are very goofy by nature. I think of Final Fantasy VII, which I've been playing the remake of, and I love that game. Scarcely has there been a game that has enraptured me completely and has made me fall in love with a cast of characters as quickly and effectively as this game does. But these characters are ridiculous, and the setting is like absurd, and a lot of the things that they get up to are crazy. It really is like watching an anime, which isn't altogether surprising. And I think that if you want to like think about something that's silly that takes itself seriously but is able to like maintain tone, anime is such a perfect example of that. I feel like in Japan they just do it different over there, which is not surprising. Elden Ring's pretty weird too, and it's from Japan, but like
that's true.
Like I don't know. I'm not sure if I have an answer to this, but I think the only thing I can think of, like the only plausible hypothesis that I can apply to this question, is just whatever tone you're planning on doing, make sure that you commit from the get-go so that it's not surprising to the player. Because I feel like if the player is expecting it, it won't remove them from the game. But if like Hitman is great because it's funny, it's weird from the get-go, you'll start a mission and then you're in the giant pink flamingo costume because you're trying to get into the Indy 500, and it's from the get-go, it sets up everything as like these kind of silly, outlandish scenarios, but you expect it because that's the tone of the game. And so I feel like whatever we end up doing, whether we end up making it really serious or kind of goofy, or in the light of like Final Fantasy where the themes are serious but the world itself is kind of silly, it has to be established from the beginning so that the players are not surprised, because I feel like that's what really takes me out more than the silliness, more than an unexpected laugh, is that it just doesn't feel like it fits with the game's tone that's already been established.
It reminds me a little bit about what you were saying in our Manor Lords episode where we talked about realism versus fantasy. You were talking a lot about consistency there as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's quite telling that keeps coming up for you. That's interesting.
I do think about that a lot. I was watching Gladiator 2 last night, and I watched the first 20 minutes of it, and then I stopped watching it because I thought it was boring and kind of lame, but and totally unnecessary. I was like, why did he make another one? But I remember watching it, and I stopped after like a dramatic death scene. I was like, this sucks. This is so tonally inconsistent. We've got all these characters that are dying in this huge battle in these brutal, morbid, disgusting ways because it's that's what it is. And then this one character dies, and everything slows down, and we have this dramatic oh my gosh, and it just feels like it's from a different movie. It just doesn't feel like it belongs here, like it's been shoehorned in. So yeah, that just reminded me. Same sort of thing. I think that's common for me to think about, I suppose.
Well, maybe I think you might be hitting on something that's really quite significant, though. I think that if you set expectations from the beginning that this is what to expect from the rest of it, then people might just be ready for it. Like maybe it's not so much a problem that these tones or whatever can't coexist together. Sometimes it might be the case in like with horror, where you're trying really hard not to relieve that tension. Like that's kind of like the point of horror. That's kind of an exception. But like it might be that it's not so much about like certain tones can or cannot go together. It's more just about like, does the player know or the viewer know what they're getting when they clock in and start trying to watch it. I think that might be why sometimes I watch a movie or play a game or something or read a book and I don't like it the first time. It's kind of like Wes Anderson's, going back to Wes Anderson, he's super weird, right? Like as far as like his style and everything with his movies, he's so quirky and so odd and so dorky. Like his movies are so dorky. Yeah. And I think that the first couple movies I saw of his, I wasn't quite understanding what was happening. So I was a little put off by it because it was just unusual to me. But I mean, now, like, I think the first one I saw of his was Fantastic Mr. Fox. That's like one of my favorite movies.
It's so
like,
good.
It's so funny. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's heartfelt and it's sweet and it's like this wonderful midlife crisis movie about this dad who just feels like he's lost all the adventure in his life and used to be something great, kind of wants to relive the glory days and everything, but like and there's a lot of like really like sweet, like poignant moments. Like, this is a kid's movie and his wife is like, I probably shouldn't have married you. Like,
Yeah.
I love you. I shouldn't have married you. That kind of stuff. And it's like, dang.
Yeah. It's heavy hitting at times.
Yeah, but it's also like super funny and it works like really well. I'm fascinated by that. And so maybe I'm just this is all kind of to say maybe you're right. Maybe a lot of it is just like expectation needs to be set properly from the beginning so that when a player or a viewer or whatever comes into it, they know what they're getting. So it's not jarring to them.
Yeah.
And that may not be the whole answer, but that might be part of it at least.
Sure, yeah. I mean, how many times have you seen a trailer for a movie and then been like, oh, that's cool, like, and then you go and you watch the movie and you're like, that's what this was about? That's how I felt when I watched Brave for the first time, the Pixar movie.
Yeah, I remember.
And I remember being like,
the same experience.
Sweet, awesome, Scottish people being Scottish, this is amazing. And then her mom turns into a bear, and I was like, what? That's what this is? Because I don't remember that in the trailer. It was just I wasn't expecting it. And maybe this is like the Wes Anderson thing. Maybe I go back and watch it again and I'll like it. I don't know. But the trailer certainly didn't help with that.
Yeah, it's definitely trailers and marketing and stuff. That probably has an impact on the expectations you bring to the table when you start it, for sure.
Yeah.
That's not to be ignored.
That's a whole other can of worms. We've never even done marketing for any of our game jams because they're game jams, but that'll be a weird thing to get into at some point.
Eventually when we get to that point, that'll be a really interesting journey.
Yeah,
I think it's a whole new world of stuff.
One other thing that I had a thought of, unless you were going to say something.
No, go for it.
You were talking about mixing horror and comedy, and I was talking about Silent Hill and Resident Evil. I watched a few months ago, I think it was back in October actually, or maybe even September, I don't remember. But I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time, the original movie, and that movie I didn't find it particular, like I wasn't like scared, I think I've got a stronger stomach for horror than I used to, and I wasn't like scared, but I was disturbed, and there's a moment in that movie that is the climax. It's kind of like the climax of the movie where it's like the dinner scene, where like this main character girl is in the room with all the freaky people and things are getting freaky, and it's very unnerving and deeply upsetting. The movie has already established by this point that it is kind of funny at times. There's some very silly characters. There's some very silly comedy in that scene. Without getting too much into spoilers, some of the family members like cut the main character girl's finger and they give it to the old grandpa to suck on because he's weird. And he's this old decrepit guy who you have not seen like move for the entire movie. He's just like sat there. He's like an old raisin. And this is a very upsetting like scene. There's lots of screaming. The cinematography is really, really tight and oppressive.
Yeah.
And I remember I was watching it with my roommates and Nick and he I just giggle thinking about it because it's so silly. But they put her bleeding finger in this old man's mouth and he starts sucking on it. And it's like, ew, this is so weird and gross. And then it cuts out to like this full like frame shot of them. And he's like doing this goofy little dance. He's like squirming in his seat. Like he's doing a funky little dance. Like he's like having the time of his life. And we do that around the house and we always lose it every time because it's so silly. It's so silly. It's such a funny scene. I don't know what the intention was, but it looks like he's dancing. And we all laughed. As soon as that moment happened, we all lost it. But it was also disturbing. Like it no longer it evolved from being horror to being legitimately upsetting because it was a point where I feel like the tonal dissonance almost helped it because you were laughing but you were uncomfortable and you're like, I don't know how to feel about this. This is gross and weird, but it's also really humorous, and I think that was actually probably one of the few times I could think of like a tonal dissonance being effective to deliver a certain mood or emotion to the viewing experience. And I just thought about that while we were talking about this. It was so odd, but it worked really well.
I think that's really interesting that you should talk about it being not necessarily scary, but still disturbing.
Yeah, it's like it evolved.
Yeah, it's interesting because maybe it is hard to have comedy and like fear exist at the same time because comedy is like this release of tension, right? But like fear is like this oppressive uncertainty kind of a thing, We recently watched The Thing together at your recommendation, and I didn't think it was terribly funny. It was just scary,
Yeah.
and uncertain. It's like it's all tension. It's all, you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know where the monster is,
Yeah.
And to talk more about the disturbing part, which can still be very effective, I think, in a funny movie. I mean, well, I'm going to talk about Scorsese for the rest of my life, but in movies like Goodfellas or The Departed or all his gangster ones, or Wolf of Wall Street. Wolf of Wall Street's a great example. Okay, so the characters in that movie are hilarious. Like, they are always cracking these jokes. They are so irreverent and so funny. But they're all doing like really, really awful stuff. Like lying, cheating, like hurting each other, like taking advantage of each other, just horrible stuff. But it's so funny. And I almost feel like, and it's not a scary movie, right? It's not scary, but it is disturbing. Like there's a lot of scenes that are like, dang, that's no fun. That's upsetting. And it's almost like it's the flippant, like casual, like goofy way that they deal with their really dark life that it almost makes it worse. It's like they're not taking this seriously at all. Like that makes this so much scarier and so much more upsetting. And then you get and the movie makes you laugh.
Yeah.
And you're laughing watching these guys do these horrible things, and you're like, what on earth? I'm like, what is going on here? But it makes them likable, makes them like charming. It also makes you realize that you're charmed by disturbing people. Like, and that can be disturbing too. Like, there's kind of a meta layer to it that like the comedy and the fun kind of like enhance or like dial in that intense disturbing kind of feeling. It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one final anecdote that made me think again of In Bruges. I do not want to get into spoilers. If you have not seen In Bruges, go watch In Bruges. It's so good.
Yeah.
But at the very end, there is that final I'm trying to beat around it, but it's the final encounter involving some explosive gunshots, and that is one of the most. It's heartbreaking. Honestly, it's a pretty heartbreaking scene. Like, that happens. But it's also so ironic that you're sitting there and you're laughing and you're like, and you feel that pain of like, oh, this sucks. This is so sad. But you're laughing at the same time. And that is the same sort of tonal dissonance where you're like, am I a bad person? Should I be laughing at this? Is this like, does this make me a bad person? Because you feel so conflicted about it. But that's just what I was reminded of when you were talking about Wolf of Wall Street and stuff.
And almost like having that internal conflict like is more upsetting than what's going on in the movie, because like it's putting that on you, like as the viewer, as the player or whatever. Like, now it's like, oh, you're the one who's feeling both of these ways. What are you going to do about it? And that's like, I don't know. Leave me alone. You're stressing me out. But it's good. It's reflective, and it can be very effective, I think, as a storytelling thing.
Yeah, this is all making me think like it's funny, we've talked more about movies than we've talked about games probably in this one. Which is making me think like, man, I gotta do some more research on games, or at least do some more like delving into the games that I have played to see what, to analyze perhaps the comedy with it. And here's a little call to action for anyone listening. If you have any examples or anything that you can think of that are any games in particular that you feel like handled that well or poorly, we'd love to hear them. That would be super, super helpful for us. It always is.
Yeah, for real. Like, that's where we get a lot of good recommendations, is from the comments from the last couple videos we've done. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Noah. We'll do this again soon, but catch you later.
Sounds good. Toodaloo.